Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. I'm here with Alan Minsk. I'm going to let Alan introduce himself before we get going, but we're hoping to talk a little bit about social media and compliance and where things are right now. But before we get started, Alan, you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored. You've had a lot of distinguished people in the past, so I'm honored. I'm Alan Minsk. I'm a partner, and I head up our food and drug practice group at Arnold Goldman Gregory. Offices in Washington, D.C. and in Atlanta, about 180 lawyers. I happen to lead our FDA group. We represent, pharmaceutical, medical device, food, cosmetic companies. Anyone who has FDA issues, that's us. And it's, primarily day-to-day counseling. We do help on the defensive side, but it's more on the proactive advising. And then we have other related life science groups like corporate and IP and healthcare compliance. But my focus is FDA.
So maybe we'll start from there for a second before we jump into ad promo, Alan. You talked about these different places that people can use FDA advice, and you talk about corporate IP, all the like. Before we jump into the deeper conversations, could you talk a little bit about the places where people need FDA advice and FDA counsel?
Sure. So sometimes primarily U.S. companies and maybe with truly startups, they may not really even know sort of where's FDA located. How do you spell FDA? It's almost, well, we know how we're regulated in the European Union or in Asia, but we don't know how FDA will regulate our product. Or it may be, well, in Europe, we had to, when we got our CE mark, this is all we had to do. What's going to be required for a 510K? It may be that they don't have sort of the proverbial 505(b)(2) strategy. It may be, hey, can we get orphan drug exclusivity? Could we get accelerated approval? So sometimes it can be as simple as we don't know what we are, or we don't know what benefits we might get. And either they're trying to raise money, or they're trying to get a potential partner, or just strategy, what's out there for us? And what would be the most efficient way to get it, or are we even eligible? So sometimes it can be kind of basic, almost FDA 101, drug 101 or food 101 or device 101. Our more sophisticated clients where they have a regulatory group or in-house counsel will typically know how to read a code of federal regulations, but it's often going to be more risk management, risk minimization, where it is gray. If it was black and white, they probably don't need us unless they need a legal opinion. But more times than not, it's, hey, I've got marketing and I've got medical and I've got my CFO, and we were all in a room and we were all trying to figure out strategy. And hey, am I being too liberal? Am I being too conservative? We have a board member who was suggesting X. We see that our competitors are doing Y. Can you help us kind of assess this? And even though I don't think I've got gray hair, my kids tell me I'm starting to get it. After 30 years, I guess I have some. And it's a little bit more of, hey, beyond the law, what's reality? Okay, what are our options? I was just talking to a general counsel, and he's like, listen, I don't need a law firm sort of issue spotting. I can do that. It's more, once we issue spot, can you help me get to a solution or make a recommendation? It's a little bit the Seinfeld. Anyone can take a reservation. It's the hold. Well, anyone can say no, but okay, it's the smart lawyer who sort of helps you understand why, if it's no, it's no, and how do we get to a maybe, or even maybe a yes, but at least a maybe, with understanding what the risks are. Due diligence often comes up. A company's going to acquire a product or license a product or divest. They may come to us. Certainly in a pre-approval scenario, there could always be the regulatory strategy questions. There can always be hey, we've got some questions to FDA. Can you review the questions? Are these the questions we want to ask? We've gotten FDA comments. We're trying to now figure out, they said we should do something. It should or shall, and is really, and if we don't do that, then what are the consequences? I don't mean jail or fines, but more, are we going to tick off a regulatory agency? Are we not going to get approved? Are they going to require more of us? Pre-approval discussions, not promotion, but pre-approval discussions, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about shortly. Quality agreements, clinical trial agreements. I would say that typically it's anything where there's kind of a legal issue or a regulatory evaluation. That's going to be me, whether that's or my group, whether it's clinical, regulatory development, conversations with FDA, conversations with investors, partners, et cetera. So it's a lot of what I call the 10-minute calls. It's a lot of, where Darshan says, hey, listen, I had a meeting. I've got some notes. Can you follow this email string and or this, 1-2-pager? Can we set up a call for 10 or 15 minutes and just talk about it? Okay. It's a lot of that. So I may build 10 clients in a given day, which my father always says is too many because you're shifting too quickly. But it's so many different things as opposed to we're closing a real estate deal, which God bless my partners, that pays our bills as well. But that's typically a one project thing. We're juggling between an OTC drug question to a device question to a cosmetic question, a prescription drug. It's a lot of those. Before we do something, before we go to a trade show, before we go to FDA, before we go to Darshan, before we put this on the website, before we sign this agreement, anything we're missing, okay, it's a lot of that. So it's a lot, but I'll stop there.
No, it's great. It's a slightly different version of what I tend to see, but it's kind of I love how we all have our own niches, and it's fascinating to see how you use yours. But let's dig a little bit. We talked about pre-approval conversations, but we also talked about promotional compliance, and obviously it's a very hot area, and it's hot in that there is a lot of questions right now. Mm-hmm. So can we start by laying the foundation about what can you say in general? What can't you say? Why should anyone care about promotional compliance in a world where the FDA right now is going, I don't know how to actually enforce things in the overall sense of things?
So it's a great question. I think one of the reasons why you're seeing the questions are getting harder is because I seem to be seeing a lot more direct to consumer, and really largely through social media or doctor to doctor, and the company, whether it's because of COVID, whether it's because of just cost cuts or what have you. I think the traditional sales rep who goes into a doctor's office, while you still have that, that's changed a lot. And I think COVID, I don't know if it proved that they weren't necessary or as much necessary or what. I think that's part of it. I think also with social media and these influencers, these endorsers, I have to ask my associates, who are these people? They get excited by some of the spokespeople for our clients. I'm like, I have no idea who these people. I mean, if it's not Bono, Paul McCartney, or Jagger, I'm lost. Okay, but it's these people in their teens or their 20s. I'm 55, so that probably tells you something. So I think that there's part of that. Now, all of that said, it shouldn't be as complicated, because I try to remind clients the law is the law. Okay. The analogy I often give when I'm doing either in-house training for clients or these types of podcasts or webinars is, when I was a kid, we had albums. Okay, and I'll say your audience can look that up later on Google. But we had albums, and then you had tapes, and then you had my dad actually had 8 tracks. Okay, and then you had albums. Now you got Spotify, and we don't even have CDs anymore. Okay, I mean, so the point is, to quote Zeppelin, the song remains the same. It's just that Robert Plant's voice is warbled when it's on an album, and it's probably clear on Spotify. Okay, right. But the rules are the rules. The song is still the song. So the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act goes back to 1906. We've always had misbranding. Well, we have misbranding. We have, you can't promote off-label. We have false or misleading. Yes, because of court actions, FDA is being mindful about going after off-label. That doesn't mean the Department of Justice or the Office of Inspector General or plaintiffs' lawyers or states can't go after that. But FDA has gotten their hands slapped, so they're trying to be careful. But they're still going after companies if it's false or misleading. Okay, First Amendment doesn't allow you to be false or misleading. Okay, so you still have those issues. And beyond FDA, you may have the Department of Justice. You could have the Securities and Exchange Commission if you're publicly traded. You could have plaintiffs' lawyers, product liability. You could have the Office of Inspector General, the Department of Justice, your competitors. And you also have your customers, which in this case often are the doctors. And so are you going to go into a doctor, not knowingly say something false or misleading, but hopefully you wouldn't. But the doctor's going to look at you kind of, quizzically and say, wait a second, that can't be right. Or that's not been my experience. And now you've lost the credibility of your doctor. So you've got the legal issues. And then you've got what I think call the practical customer interface issues. I think with social media, whether or not it's websites, whether or not it's, the endorsers, whether or not it's the LinkedIn's and not the WeChats, what the kids are doing, the TikToks and all that kind of stuff. If we had a client who was going to do a TikTok commercial, And the Instagram, that was the word I was trying to come up with, Instagram. It shows, again, I'm showing you my age. That, or Facebook, or ad-sponsored, company-sponsored ads, Google-sponsored ads, all those kinds of things. You're trying to get very pithy. You're trying to get to 30 seconds or less because of attention span. You're trying to be user-friendly in the language. Hey, if Dushan's got this condition and he seems like a normal guy, then he can empathize with me. Whereas company spokesperson, company representative speaking, well, of course they're trying to sell their product. Okay, but if Darshan's got a similar experience, hey, we can relate. We see that also a lot with orphan drug products, with these rare diseases and conditions. You're not alone because you have this condition, you don't even know what it is. It doesn't have a name, or it's got a long name, and your general practitioner says, well, I've never seen anything quite like this. And all of a sudden you're thinking, well, am I crazy? Am I that unique? And all of a sudden you've got these patient advocacy websites that say, you're not alone, you may have this kind of thing, which then gets into a little bit of this, is this going to be pre-approval promotion, which you can't do, or is it pre-approval discussion? Is it disease state awareness, which FDA is backing off? Or is this wink, wink, nod, nod product promotion because the logos and the color schemes and it's you're the only one in the space, and who you fool, and you are the proverbial purple pill. You are McDonald's, even though you never said McDonald's. You're the golden arches. You're the swoosh. Everyone has that Nike. Those kinds of questions come up, particularly with first and second product companies who are trying to be aggressive, but also know that they're going to be somewhat of a target for their competitors, and they're trying to get out there with the patient interface. So those are just some of the things that come to mind.
That's quite a few, and we can jump into a few of them as we continue the discussion. But let's start with one just for discussion's sake. I thought it was kind of interesting. I don't know if I'm sure you get the same volume of information I do, but one of the things I thought was interesting recently was it was Fashion Week. I think it was New York Fashion Week, and one of the companies that has a prostate cancer pill did a blue jeans commercial, blue jeans sort of walk or whatever it was. And I thought it was really interesting, this new way of promoting your product by talking about, well, technically you didn't promote your product, you promoted the disease, you did disease state awareness. But I found it kind of fascinating that people are now exploring new ways to send your message. You talked about Jagger, you talked about McCartney, and those are great. And we can talk a little bit about what the old influencers look like, what the new influencers look like, and what are the rules associated with that. But what do you think when you're guiding a company that is going, I want to talk about doing blue jeans for my prostate cancer thing? What rules do you help them set up? Do you just go FTC, or do you sort of go broader? Okay.
So I'm typically, when it's coming to me, again, because of the FDA, that's typically me. And it's typically going to be a promotional review committee or a MLR, LMR, whatever the company wants to call it. And so it comes up maybe as a concept first, where the ad agency or the commercial person comes up with an ad agency, a concept. And so we'll have legal, regulatory, medical, on, and maybe sometimes it'll be compliance depending on the company. And I think the idea is, okay, so is there going to be product promotion? Yes or no? Is this a prescription drug? Is this a medical device? Is this a cosmetic? Is this an over-the-counter drug? So who would be the regulatory body that would most likely look at it? For example, is this a food product? Whatever, dietary supplement, So are we talking FDA? Are we talking FTC? Well, even if it's regulated by the FTC, I always look at FDA because FTC typically defers a lot to FDA, and the FTC really goes after egregious claims or these proverbial infomercial type, quacky type products. Doesn't mean that they can't go after it, just they typically see to the FDA. So I put on, and by the way, the FDA and the FTC general standards of whether or not it has to be truthful. Okay, well, that's FTC. It can't be false or misleading. FDA, got to be substantiated. Well, that gets back. So there's not that far off in just the general thinking. Who's the audience? Is this disease state? Okay, if it's just an unbranded disease state, we're trying to create a buzz about a condition. Okay, well, we may not have an FDA regulatory issue. Is there going to be anything else handed out as that person's going up and down the walkway? Is there outside of the room going to be some product promotion? Is the person going to speak at the program? is there separation of church and state, I guess?
Mhm.
Is this purely disease state? Is this purely unbranded? By the way, are we going to put a video? Are we going to tape this and then put it on our website? Or is it going to go on the company's, LinkedIn page or Facebook, and is there going to be some verbiage underneath that? Glad you could watch Gene's Week, brought to you by Minsk tablets. Okay. So have I now branded this? Have I now given the brand and the indication and the olden 2009, the Google sponsored links, which have basically said, if you have a headache, see Minsk tablets, click here for more information. And FDA says, no, you can't do that. So that's kind of the analysis that I start going through. Where is it going? Who's the audience? What else will be handed out? But you're absolutely right about the cleverness of some of these things. And again, focusing on eye-grabbing, very short, pithy things, and kind of what I would call hip, outside the box thinking to grab someone's attention. Absolutely.
So I kind of find it fascinating the way you described it, which is in many ways, people keep thinking that, oh, we're going to be super cutting edge. And people often the modality is cutting edge, whether you're talking about Snapchat, you're talking about TikTok or something else.
Right.
But the rules are still the same. The rules still apply. So I guess my question for you is, how do you help these companies set the rules? And what I'm talking about is when we go back, and this is sort of a little bit of a hardcore FDA discussion, but I'm going to get into it because I don't get a chance to do this as often as I'd like to. But one of the things everyone talks about is the CAR standard, the competent and reliable scientific evidence standard, versus the substantial evidence standard. And I haven't quite figured out why the FDA doesn't defer to that when they're talking about things like off-label communications, because if you could say, as long as you have substantial evidence, great. Obviously, they've had issues and they've been slapped down on that issue. But there's that third standard that's been sort of sitting out there for a long time, which is this substantial scientific evidence standard, which is like no one actually knows what the hell that means. But my question for you is, as you're guiding companies, do you tend to defer to these two standards, or do you even bring up this third one that no one really knows what to do with?
Well, it's a great question. If it's a concept, I often try to just say, guys, let's just step back and understand the general parameters. What are the guardrails? Before I start getting into cars and good reprint practices and then allow and consistent with the approved labeling, CFL. If it's pre-approval, I don't even necessarily have those issues. Okay, so you're just presuming that it's even approved. I basically start out, and that's fine. I'm just going to go on a little bit. I start out and say, listen, if we're pre-approval, I'll do pre-approval, but if we're pre-approval, let's just start out with, you can't promote an investigational product as safe and effective. I don't care if you went to law school or not. That's the rule. I don't have to cite you anything. I mean, I can 312.7 or 812.7 if I want to show off, but basically that's it. Whether you're commercial, marketing, medical, okay? Then I say, oh, and by the way, I would extend it. This is Alan to some extent, extending it. I wouldn't compare myself to an approved product, okay? So Darshan's approved. Okay, you may be the third string catcher on a Major League Baseball team, and I've used this analogy probably in webinars. Okay, and I'm the phenom in minor league. Okay, but I'm not in the major leagues, and you're the 25th player on the 20. Okay, but guess what? You're staying at the Ritz-Carlton. You're flying first class. Star phenom is taking buses to Richmond. Okay, and I'm staying at a Comfort Inn, fine hotel. Okay, but not the Ritz. Now. So to say I'm just as good as you, wait a second, you're in the major leagues. I'm in the minor leagues. Now, if I make it to the major leagues, now we can have this discussion, okay? Because now we are apples and apples. So now back to the analogy with the pre-approval. If I say pre-approval product, I'm just as good as Darshan, unless I was doing a head-to-head study and that was part of my primary endpoint, I need to be careful about saying that, okay? And even if it is the primary endpoint, I have to be careful about saying it. So that would also imply approval and or I'm safe and effective. Now, post-approval, I have to remind them, you can always say what's in the label. Of course, there's this thing called consistent with, FDA-approved labeling, good reprint practices, respond to unsolicited. We can talk about that more, but I say, the two basic things is you can't be false or misleading, okay? On the device side, you've got adulteration, which can be a lack of PMA, but let's just stick with false or misleading. And you need to be approved and stick to the label. Okay, and then people say, well, you mean I can only use the label? Well, okay, not a label, and then there's these other guidances, things like that. I don't get really into the substantial, the last one, because that is kind of murky, okay? But certainly I'll mention, listen, responding to unsolicited requests, God bless. Good reprint practices may be an option. Consistent with the FDA-approved labeling, may be an option. All these car things, that's now, let's look at the piece, okay? But I'm not gonna do that overview at the outset because their head's gonna explode. But if I give them what the law is, here's the parameters of what you can't do, okay? You can't do this. Now there's a lot of things you can do, but, okay, here are the parameters. And then we look at the specific piece. So I want them to understand conceptually, because I don't want to waste their time hiring PR and ad agencies to come up with pieces that are they're not going to be able to fly. Or let's do a Twitter campaign, okay? But we want to say all this, guys, it ain't going to happen if it's an approved product, and you're going to have a black box and or ISI, important safety information. So it's a non-starter. So I tried to encourage them to do concept reviews to see, are we at least on the right page? We want to do a video. We want to do a podcast with Darshan. Can we do that? Well, okay. I'm not going to say no. What do you plan to say? Can we see a script? Can we see a board, a storyboard? And then we can get into the minutia. And if the answer is no, I owe it to them to explain it, not to just simply say, well, no. No, because here's my concern. And they may say, well, what's the risk? It's always, well, what's the risk? Okay. I use speeding analogies. 55 is the speed limit. You're going to go 65. At least you have your seatbelt on. You're not high. You're not wasted. You don't have a dead body in the back. Okay. All bets are off. But if the officer pulls you over going 65 and a 55 and you've got your seatbelt on and you don't have any dead bodies, they can still pull you over because you weren't. Okay. So there's, well, I'm not going to hurt anybody. Well, I tried that once with someone. He said, I wouldn't have, he said, you went through a stop sign. And I said, well, I didn't see it. And he said, well, I guess you wouldn't have seen the person you would have hit. And I said, no, I would have felt it. Okay. That's what when I recall, my wife says I wasn't that stupid. But the point is, you don't have to hit anybody. If you hit somebody, all bets are off. Okay. But even if I don't, if I've spud, if I speeded, whatever the past tense is, if I sped, then I got a problem. Okay. And then that's when you get back to what's the company's risk? How can we minimize it? Is a disclaimer helpful? Is a qualifier helpful? Does it eliminate risk? It minimizes risk. Why are we doing it this approach? Have we tried that approach? Is it unsolicited? Is it proactive? Is it coming from the MSL, disease state, or is it coming commercial? What are we trying? And I always try to say, let's show our cards. I'm on your side. Okay. We're in this together. You've got a job to do. I've got a job to do. And it's not it's not an us versus them. We're in this together. You're trying to sell product, or you're trying to let people know about your disease state or who you are. God bless. And I have a job to try to minimize, hopefully eliminate the risk, but at a minimum, minimize the risk and educate you along the way so you don't make the same mistake or ask the same question later on. The only one who gets rich by that is the lawyers. God bless us all. But hopefully it's supposed to be the next question, the more sophisticated question, because now you've got, even if you're in commercial or marketing or medical, you now have an understanding of what the general parameters are, and you won't waste anybody's time.
I love I've used the same analogy, the speeding analogy, because it's so useful. Because I find the driver's ed thing to be useful multiple different ways, because you also get the FDAs in the pockets of the pharma industry because they get PDUFA payments, and you're like, no, just because you go take a driver's test doesn't mean that you're going to pass. It's the same analogy.
And by the way, we're not even talking about healthcare compliance like OIG, DOJ. We're just focusing on FDA. But again, if you can get the basics down, if you know how to drive safely and you know how to put your seatbelt, well, now you're minimizing the risk. And then if you remember, hey, use your turn signal, make sure your insurance is up to date. Okay, so if I can get the FDA part, it doesn't mean I'm going to be solid on everything else. We know that that's not always the case. But I certainly am, now I'm in best practice. I'm probably in the law. I'm minimum best practice. And probably I'm doing the flow of traffic at that point. Okay. And then everything else will probably be variations on a theme. I'm tweaking it to make it even better, whether that's DOJ, whether that's healthcare compliance, whether that's product liability. Okay. I've got sort of a basic fundamental foundation.
Let's talk about that basic, because this comes up, and I'm sure it comes up for you. When I serve on MLR or PRC committees, this pops up for me often. Regulatory says this is okay. Legal I'm kind of going, I'm not sure I agree with that, but am I crossing into your lane
Right.
to tell you what to do and what not to do? How do you handle that?
I say, what would Darshan do?
WWDD, I think.
Right. That's a great question, and it comes up a lot. What's also interesting, and I'll answer that in a second, but what's also interesting is that often commercial and medical become similar. Okay, medical's like, but doctors need to know this, or the patients need to know this, so that's what the data showed. And commercial's like, yeah, go doc. Okay, disease state, medical information.
Right.
Practice of medicine. No, we don't do practice of medicine. We're the drug or device company.
Right.
But to your question, I find that regulatory is often the most important, and I don't mean that to be derogatory towards medical or commercial, but they know the label, or they know the history, the correspondence with FDA, and so they kind of live it, love it, and it's almost by heart, and they know the data, or they can get access to the data, and they've got a little bit of the legal in them. What I would say is this: a good regulatory will try to explain their rationale. Rarely do I differ with regulatory on their understanding. There are times when I think someone may just be wrong, okay?
Right.
And I won't publicly embarrass them, okay? I may just privately say something, oh, well, I often will say if it's in a public setting or, an MLR, I might say, oh, it's, let me check on that. I think what you're thinking is this, or, what are you basing that? Remind me what you're basing that on. And I'll play sort of deaf, dumb, and blind, even though I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about. I'll sometimes play well, I'm just a lawyer. If more times than not, where there's and I'll call it disagreement, it's not even a disagreement. It may be what is the risk or what's the likelihood of risk, because regulatory's job, understandably, is basically the speed limit is 55. Okay, and it's black and white. Okay, and it's not that the lawyer says 65 is 55. But it's simply, well, let's look at this, the question of what's the risk? And regulatory is, why do I even want to go there? Okay. My job is the risk is, why are we having that discussion? And I'm like, well, because this is more than you. Okay. You represent the company, but I'm telling you, I know what the CEO and CFO and the commercial guy are thinking, which is, that's sweet. Okay, but we're willing to go 60 or 65. What I don't know is, are they willing to go 75 and 80, and are they willing to put on the seatbelt? So I will sometimes say, if I'm asked, I'll give my assessment of risk. I think you're 65 and a 55. I'm not going to tell you to do it because 65 is not 55, but let's at least put on our seatbelt by adding this word or that word. If I fundamentally disagree with regulatory, I'll often try to email them or text them, or may have a discussion with them ahead of time, and just simply say, I don't want to sandbag you. I saw your comments in Viva or whatever it was. And I'll always simply say, I don't disagree with you, but I do have a question. Okay, I may disagree with them, but it's more I'm trying to understand, and I don't want to sandbag you, because I would not want someone to do that to me. And I think that there's a way to do that. Or I might say, Darshan makes a fair point, and I don't disagree with them. Do I think you're going to go to jail on this one? No. What I think is more likely is a notice of violation or a warning letter, or you're going to piss off the reviewer, that kind of thing. And then regulatory can say, well, what do you think about this? Or I agree with Alan. I just felt that I needed to, okay. And sometimes regulatory will say, Alan, what do you think? Okay. Some people in regulatory really know their ad promo pre-approval communications. And some are like, hey, listen, I've done a lot of INDs in my life and IDEs, and I don't really know anything about ad promo. Okay. And so to some extent, they're relying on me. I've taught many a regulatory person on MLR and PRC, which is which is fine, but it makes me a little nervous because I don't want to be the L and the R. Okay. But I think that there are ways of doing it. And it's really no different than any kind of business communications that you would have on anything. Okay. Right. If you're in any meeting, there's a time and a place. If I think someone's wrong, have there been heated MLR PRC calls? Absolutely. And they've typically been heated when I felt that someone was twisting my words. That I don't like. Well, you said, no, I didn't say that. Okay. or they said, well, the previous reviewer said, well, okay, first of all, I'm not the previous reviewer. Or we have to go to print. Well, then why am I here? Okay, it's already at the printers. I'm not a rubber stamp. I have a job to do. And I've gotten angry when people feel as though, well, he said yes before I could finish a sentence. So the lawyer said yes. No, I said yes, but don't treat me as the enemy or a necessary evil. I appreciate I am to some extent, but I've been hired by the company to protect them. And the fact that I'm not meeting your particular self-interested needs, I'm sorry, okay? But this is a group dynamic. It's very rare. I've done it for 30 years. I've served on, I don't even know how many PRCs. It's rare, but those are the situations where once somebody said, well, but we've said this before, and I said, well, show me the thing. And they showed me the website. And it doesn't say what you just said, okay? And they go, well, but it implied, no, it doesn't. I said, so don't say this is what we've approved. Because I didn't even approve it, but what you're showing me doesn't even make your argument. That you're wasting my time. And I almost feel like you're trying to pull a fast one on me, which gets back to, we're all in this together. It's a trust issue. I want you to succeed, okay? It's in my best legal, I don't want you to get a warning letter, okay? But I want more business. It's a relationship, okay? So I'm not trying to piss off anybody. I've got a job to do, you've got a job to do. And we'll do it better if we're open with one another. I mean, but that's human nature. That doesn't have to be a podcast about FDA. That's just my wife and me, my kids and me, you and me. I mean, it's just nice. It's sweet. It's, kumbaya,
I guess what I'm really referring to is not so much the element of we have clear rules. This is 55 versus 65. Those are always good questions to have. I'm thinking more like the medical device world, where the rules are often unclear and best practices follow the drug world. And you're going, I can't really cite it, but yeah.
Right. And so, great. And because there's not as many rules on the device side. And even with the drug world, the label's pretty big. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's that gray. And so the gray then becomes somewhat subjective. Okay. I had an associate who once asked me, what if I'm wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, hopefully, and I said, tongue in cheek, hopefully you won't get us into a malpractice lawsuit. Okay. But I said, you do the best you can. Okay. Yeah. Which is you look at the law, you look at the statute, regulation, guidance, warning letters, what FDA said.
Yeah.
You learn the product, you talk it out with colleagues and on a PRC MLR, and then you come up with what you think is your best answer based on something. It's not just gut. It shouldn't just be gut, but there are going to be times where I'll tell a general counsel or regulatory, I can't cite you chapter and verse. What I can cite you is that with 30 years of experience, I've seen similar enforcement, or what I've seen most companies do, maybe it's a best practice thing, and even then I can't really cite you because there's thousands of companies, so what's best practice? Okay, but I think that this is a way to do it. And then if I can't cite the chapter and verse on FDA, but I still think it's a bad idea, I say, listen, I'm not your marketing person. I do wonder how the doctor's going to perceive this. I do wonder how your competitor's going to perceive this. FDA is just one piece of this. So, what if, God forbid, something goes wrong? Well, okay, well, now there's going to be an adverse event or a medical device report. Let's say there's not that, okay? But even if there is, now I got product liability. Let's say the competitor turns me in, okay? And you could say, oh, bring on the letter, okay? Well, you're saying that because you're saying, well, then I've obviously gotten in their crawl, and the general counsel's like, I don't want these kinds of letters, okay? Or the CEO or whatever. So I try to bring up other sources, if you will. And then sometimes I say, listen, I can't cite you chapter and verse. That's why I can't really assess what the risk is. I just don't think this is a good idea, and here's why. Okay. Yeah. And I prefer this, but I'm not the only one on an LMR, PRC. And that's why I say, listen, that's my opinion. And so often they'll say, well, Alan said. I said, well, no, Alan said, but let's hear from Darshan. And I'll say, if I'm the minority, I'm the minority. Okay. Yeah. I've been on plenty of committees. Okay. I was the president of my kids' day school. Okay. And I said, I'm not always going to be right. Okay. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. There was Justice Brett and there was, Justice Rehnquist. They didn't always get it right, or they weren't with the majority rule. And I said, if 2 of the 3 members are okay with it and I'm not, okay. I don't think we're going to go to jail. I don't think we're going to letter. I just don't like it. And I think that there's some risk, but I'm willing to take one for the team. I've expressed my concerns. I have a right that next time, if we push it bit further. I'm going to say, I have these concerns, and now I raise you another concern. But at the end of the day, as long as the company understands the concerns, the risks, and they're open to ideas, that's all you really can ask for, is open communication and transparency and trust.
I love it. Alan, we're well past time, but any parting words?
Thank you.
Well done.
I enjoyed it. And love to do it again if the opportunity presents itself, but thank you for asking. I'm honored.
Absolutely.